Hello everyone, I'm Saurabh and I welcome you back to the Digital Board series by Orchids Biosciences. This is the third part of the chapter, Control and Coordination. If you haven't watched the previous videos yet, please check for its link in the description below which I have provided. In this video, we will be discussing about the control and coordination in plants. In the previous videos, we have seen how the nervous tissue causes the movement in our body in response to various stimuli. Similarly, we will be studying about the movements in plants, which include the nastic and the tropic movements. Then, under tropic movements, we will be discussing about the types of tropism, which include phototropism, hydrotropism, chemotropism, and geotropism. Then, at the end, we will look into the plant hormones, which are also called as phytohormones, in which we will discuss about the hormones which inhibit the growth of the plant as well as the hormones which promote the growth of the plant. So let's start with control and coordination in plants. We have seen in the previous videos how the nervous tissues were causing any movement in response to the stimulus in human beings. Now let us discuss about the movements as well as the various stimuli in case of plants. So how does the plant show their movement and what are the stimuli to which this plant show the movement? Let us discuss one by one. To understand the various movements and stimuli in plant, let us consider few examples as well as few experiments. First, let us take the example of the Mimosa pudica plant. What is this Mimosa pudica plant? It is commonly called as a touch me not plant. So whenever we go and touch the leaflets of these plants, what happens is suddenly the leaflets will fold up. So the stimulus for this plant is the sensation of touch, due to which the movement that they show is by the folding up of these leaflets. So these leaflets fold up in response to the stimulus of touch. If we look, the base of every leaflet will have pulvinus, and the cells of this pulvinus is always filled with water. So the cells of pulvinus will be having some rigid shape and it is filled with water. So whenever we touch these leaves, what happens is from these cells of pulvinus, the water will come out. And since the water comes out of it, the cells which is having a rigid shape will now shrink. So we see that due to a stimulus of touch, there is the loss of water from the cells of pulvinus, due to which the cells will shrink and the plant's leaflets will fold up. So here the movement is folding up of leaves and the stimulus is touch. Now let us discover few more stimulus in plant and the various movements in response to them. For that, let us consider few experiments. Starting with the first one. For that, we need to first fill a conical flask with water and then cover the neck of the flask with some mesh wire and place some few freshly germinated bean seeds or any other seeds on this wire mesh. Then take a cardboard box which is open from one side, whereas it should be closed from three sides. So from the top, from the bottom and from the left it is closed, whereas it is open from the right side. Why it is open from the right side? Because the seeds which we have placed on this mesh should get some sunlight to grow, because the plants require sunlight. So we have to be sure that from the side where it is open, there should also be a window through which sunlight is coming in. Now what happens is, after few days, when we notice the growth of this bean seed, the seed will show a different kind of growth in such a way that the shoot system will be directing towards the sunlight, whereas the root system will be directing away from the sunlight. So there is a directional response to the sunlight. So here the stimulus is sunlight, whereas the movement is in terms of growth. So again there is some stimulus which is the sunlight, and there is again some movement in the plant that is in respect with growth. Now if we turn the flask to the opposite side after few days, now it has been growing in a specific direction. The shoot is growing towards the sun, the root is growing away from the sun. Now if we turn the flask to the opposite direction, what will happen? If we turn the flask to the opposite direction, what happens is the shoot is coming on the left and this is on the right. Slowly, again after few days, if we notice, this shoot will again start growing towards the sun and the root will go back again away from the sun. So always the shoot part of the plant will grow towards the sun and root will grow away from the sun. So again there is a directional movement in response to the stimulus, and the stimulus is sun. So through this experiment, we are trying to come to a conclusion that wherever is the sun's direction, to that direction only the growth will be there, either towards the sun or away from the sun. If it is shoot, it will grow towards the sun, and if it's root, it will grow away from the sun. Now let us see some more stimulus. For that, let us consider another experiment. For this experiment, what we need to do is we need to take two containers, container A and container B, and then fill this container with soil and sow some seeds or a plant sapling. The container A can be left as such, while in the second container B, we need to place a clay pot. Why is there a need for clay pot? We will soon see. So container A we are leaving as such, whereas in container B we are adding this clay pot. Okay, moving on to the next step. Now what we need to do is water the soil in container A daily and uniformly, while do not water the soil in container B, but put some water in the clay pot which is buried in the soil. So we don't have to water the entire soil, rather we can put some water in this clay pot. Whereas in case of the container A, the water can be spread uniformly and every day it can be poured. Now after few days, if we see the germination in both A and B, there will be a difference in the germination of the roots. When we remove the plant very carefully from the soil without damaging the roots and observe the root, we can clearly see a difference in the growth of the root. In case of the plant which is kept in container A, the root growth will be uniform and in the straight direction downwards, because the water availability in the soil is almost equal in all the places. Whereas the root growth in the plant which is kept in container B will be different. The growth of the root will be towards the clay pot which is having water, because the soil is not having water. So in order to get water, the root will start growing towards this clay pot. So there will be a directional growth towards wherever the water is. So again here if we see, the stimulus is water, whereas again the movement is in terms of growth of the root. So with this we can come to a conclusion that there are various stimulus for the plants, and there are even various types of movement. So the movements in plant can be divided into whether it is growth related or it is not related to growth. So after looking into various examples, now we might have an idea about various stimulus like touch, water, sun, and about the various movements in the plant as well, which can be related to growth or independent of growth. The movement in case of Mimosa plant, if we take, is non-directional. Why it is called non-directional? Because it will always fold up irrespective of the direction of the stimulus. If we touch from the right also it folds up, if we touch from the left also it folds up. So there is no specific direction that if the stimulus is from this direction, the leaflet will fold in this direction. So the movement or the folding up of leaves in Mimosa is non-directional, it is constant. Whereas the movement in case of the experiments which we have seen, that is the experiment with the sun and plant, as well as the experiment with the water pot and plant. In these two experiments, if you see, wherever the sun was, the shoot was growing towards that direction and the root was growing away from it. In the experiment of water pot, what did we see? The root started growing towards the water. So wherever there is the availability of the water, the root is growing. So in response to the stimulus, there is a directional movement by the plant. So the movement can either be non-directional, that is in case of the first example, or it can be directional, which is depending upon the direction of the stimulus. If the response to the stimulus is non-directional, this kind of movement is called as nastic movement. Whereas if the response to the stimulus is directional, it is called as tropic movements. So these are the two major types of movements in plants. So now we are clear about the nastic and tropic movements. Now let us discuss about the various types of tropic movements in plants. The tropic movements can be phototropic movements called as phototropism. It can be hydrotropism. It can be chemotropism. it can be geotropism, and so on. So there are various tropic movements in plants, out of which we will be studying about the photo, hydro, chemo, and geotropism. Starting with phototropism. Phototropism is a directional movement of the plant part in response to the light stimulus. For example, in the experiment we saw that the shoot was growing towards the light. So whenever there is a directional movement of a plant part towards the light, it is called as phototropism. Now this phototropism can be positive as well as negative. If we see, the shoots will grow towards the light and the roots will grow away from the light. So the shoots are positively growing towards the light, so it is called as positively phototropic. Whereas the roots will grow away from the light, that is why it is called as negatively phototropic, and this is called as negative phototropism. Next, moving on to the next type of tropism, that is geotropism. Geotropism is nothing but the directional movement of a plant part in response to the gravity of Earth. So which is moving towards the gravity of Earth? The root is moving towards the gravity of Earth. So we can say the root is positively geotropic, or it is showing positively geotropism. Now, is the plant shoot growing towards the gravity, or is it going away from the gravity? It is going against the gravity. So we will say this is negatively geotropic, or showing negative geotropism. So something positive means going towards it, and negative means moving away from it. That is very simple. Let us learn about few more tropisms. The other two are chemotropism and hydrotropism. To understand hydrotropism, I have already explained one experiment in which the plant was kept in a container and there was a clay pot. So hydrotropism is nothing but the movement of plant or movement of a plant part in response to water. Hydro means water. If there is any directional movement of plant part in response to water, it is called as hydrotropism. If it is moving towards the water, it is called as positive hydrotropism. If it is moving away from the water, it is called as negative hydrotropism. Then what is chemotropism? Chemotropism has the word chemo. Chemo means chemicals here. So if there is any movement of any part of the plant towards any specific chemical, then it is called as chemotropism. Let me give you an example of positive chemotropism. This we will be learning in detail in the next chapter, that is how do organisms reproduce. But just to give you an idea, in plants there are two gametes, male and female. This male gamete reaches the female gamete through a tube which is called as pollen tube. So the germination of this pollen tube so that the male gamete can go and reach the female gamete is an example of positive chemotropism. So during the process of fertilization, the growth of this pollen tube which carries a male gamete towards the ovule which contains a female gamete is an example of positive chemotropism. So now we are clear with the idea of tropisms. The directional movement of plant in response to a stimuli. The stimuli can be water, stimuli can be a chemical, it can be sunlight, it can be gravity of Earth. So these are about various stimuli to which the plant responds. If this response are to be made very fast, the information transfer must happen very quickly. For this, the medium of transmission must be very fast. So for the information to transfer quickly, the medium of transmission is supposed to be fast. And as a fast medium of transmission, in human beings there is nervous system. But there are various drawbacks for this nervous system also. So let us see what are the drawbacks to this nervous system. First, the nervous impulse or the electrical impulse which are carried by the nervous system, they will only reach the cells which are connected by nervous tissues, not each and every cell in the animal body. So the first drawback of the nervous system is that it will reach only cells connected by nervous tissue. So this is the first drawback. It cannot reach all the cells of the body. Secondly, Once an electrical impulse is generated in a cell and transmitted, it will take some time for the cell to reset its mechanism before it can send the second impulse, or it can create the second impulse. So again, here comes another drawback of the nervous system, that is, it cannot continuously transmit or create, or I can use the word generate, new impulses. So it takes some time for the cell to reset its mechanism. It cannot continuously keep on transmitting a new impulse. So to avoid all these drawbacks, most of the multicellular organisms use another method of communication, which is a chemical method of communication, and it is called as the hormonal communication. And these chemicals are known as hormones. This hormonal communication, or this chemical communication, is definitely slower than nervous communication, but this will make it sure that it reaches each and every part of the body, irrespective of the fact it is associated with the nervous system or not. So even though it is slow, it can reach each and every cell of the body. These chemical compounds, which are called as hormones, for example, it is produced by the cell. So this will diffuse into the surroundings from the cell, and if the cell which is present next to it or present in its surroundings is able to detect this information, or is able to detect this hormone, it will be able to transmit this information from one cell to another. So by the process of diffusion, this hormones or this chemical information can be transferred from cell to cell. So it doesn't require a nervous system to connect all the cells. Just by the process of diffusion, it can transfer the information to the nearby cells. This will be slower, of course, but it can reach all the cells of the body. Now, let us take an example that we have already worked, that is with the shoot growing towards the light. So how are these hormones responsible for the directional growth of the shoot in response to the light stimulus? If we zoom into the shoot tip and see, there are certain hormones which are present at the shoot tip, and these are auxins. An auxin is responsible for the cell elongation or cell growth in the shoot tip. So we know there is the shoot tip, then there is sunlight through which the light stimulus is coming to the shoot tip. When there is a light stimulus coming to the shoot tip, the auxins will diffuse to that side of the shoot where the light is not present, or to the dark side of the shoot. So in the next step, this auxins will move to the part where the light is not there. And then this concentration of the auxin which is present here will stimulate the cells to grow longer on the side of the shoot which is away from the light. Thus, what will happen is there will be continuous elongation of the cells here. So as a result, if we see, there is this bending of the shoot towards the light. So as a result, the shoot will bend towards the light. So if we try to sum up what happens, there is auxin which is present at the shoot tips for their growth. Whenever there is a sunlight at a specific direction of the plant, the auxin will diffuse to the side where the sunlight is absent. And then these auxins which are present there will slowly stimulate the cells to grow longer on the side of the shoot which is away from the light. So this growth of the cells here will cause the shoot to bend towards the light. So this is how auxin is responsible for the growth of the stem towards the light. So we have seen that in case of animals, the movement were associated with the nervous tissues. Here the movement is associated with the hormones, and the hormone which is responsible in this specific case is auxin, which promote the cell growth. There are various hormones which will promote the growth of specific parts of the plant, and there are various hormones which will inhibit the growth of the parts of the plant. So hormones in plants can be divided into two categories: the ones which promote the growth and ones which inhibit the growth. Auxin is the one which promotes the growth of the cell. So under promotion of growth, the first one is auxins. There are a few other important hormones as well which we need to study. They are gibberellin, cytokinin, and ethylene. Whereas The inhibition is done by other hormones. We can take an example of abscisic acid. Let us see what are their specific functions, starting with the hormones which promote the growth. First hormone is gibberellin, and this gibberellin hormone is responsible for the growth of stem and fruits. The next hormone which promotes the growth is cytokinin, and cytokinin hormone is responsible for cell division in plants. The third hormone that we studied under the growth promoting hormones is ethylene or ethene, which is responsible for the ripening of fruits. So these are the examples which we need to remember: gibberellin, cytokinin and ethylene in case of plant growth promoters. We will see one example of growth inhibitor also, that is abscisic acid, and abscisic acid is responsible for the yellowing of leaves and the wilting of leaves. So these are the various important hormones starting from auxin, gibberellin, cytokinin, ethylene and abscisic acid. Now let us quickly recall what we have seen in this video. We started with the control and coordination in plants, in which we went through 3 experiments to understand the various stimuli and movements. Then we finally came to a conclusion that movements are majorly classified in plants as the nastic movement, which are the non-directional movement in response to stimuli, and tropic movements, which are the directional movement in plants in response to the stimuli. In tropic movements, we studied about phototropism, that is a directional movement of the part of the plant towards the light. Next, we studied about hydrotropism, that is the movement of the plant part towards water. Chemotropism, movement of plant part or directional movement of the plant part towards chemicals. And the last one, that is geotropism, which is movement towards the Earth's gravity. So this is about the tropic movements that we have studied. Then we studied about the drawbacks of the nervous system and why hormonal system is there in case of multicellular organisms, because it can possibly reach all the cells of the body. In hormonal systems, we discussed about the hormonal system in plants, in which we discussed about the hormones which promote the growth as well as the hormone which inhibit the growth. In the growth promoting hormones, we discussed about auxin in detail, where the auxin will diffuse to the side which is not having the sunlight and promote the cell growth in that area, so that there is a bending of the shoot towards the sunlight. Then we discuss other hormones like gibberellins, which is responsible for the growth of stem and fruits. We discuss about cytokinin, which is responsible for the cell division in plants, and we discussed about ethylene, which is responsible for growth and ripening of the fruits. And finally, we discussed about the abscisic acid, which is responsible for yellowing and wilting of leaves. So that is all that we have seen in this video. Now let us quickly take up a question from the previous years. The question was, what is hydrotropism? And design an experiment to demonstrate this phenomenon. We know that experiment which we have discussed in this video about the clay pot and the plant being kept, 2 containers over there, A and B. We can explain that experiment here. And what is hydrotropism? We can define hydrotropism is directional. We have to very clearly mention the word directional, because if we don't mention the word directional, it goes to nastic movement, which is non-directional. So hydrotropism is a directional movement of the plant part towards water. So here there are 2 major keywords. First one is directional movement and second one is water. So with this words directional movement and water, it is clear that it is tropism and it is hydrotropism. We can even give an example: movement of roots, or we can also say bending of roots towards water, and this signifies positive hydrotropism. So this is about hydrotropism, and when asked to explain the experiment, we can explain the experiment in which we take two containers A and B, and in container B we put a water pot which is made up of clay. So when we see the germination of plants in A and B, the germination of root in A will be straight downwards, whereas the germination of the root in B will be bending towards the water pot, which signifies that the bending of the root will be towards water, because here the water is uniformly present in the soil, so the root growth will be straight, whereas in case of the second container there will be bending of root towards water. So this explains hydrotropism. So now I think you're clear with various types of tropism and hormones in plants. With this, we come to the end of this video. In the next video, we will be discussing about the hormones in human beings. With that, we will come to the end of this entire chapter. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you like this video, please do not forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel.